Thank you so much for the organizers of CRRC for the invitation for us to deliver this methods workshop, and thanks to our audience for sticking here and joining us. Our methods workshop today is titled Empowering Research Subjects with Photovoice in the South Caucasus. This was developed from an ongoing research project funded by the American Research Institute for the South Caucasus Junior Research Fellowship in 2021 and the CRRC Research Fellowship in 2022. Some of the slides in this presentation today feature photographs taken by our research participants. Photo credits are provided. All photo titles and pseudonyms were chosen by the participants themselves. This workshop has been designed and will be facilitated by our research team, which includes myself, Dr. Ariel Otruba. I'm the primary investigator on this study. I'm the InFocus War and Peace Scholar in Residence at Moravian University and an adjunct professor at Arcadia University. Hopefully online, we will have Dr. Nino Dzotsenidze, who is an independent scholar and research analyst at the California Center for Rural Policy at Cal Poly Humboldt. She's in California, so it's like 5 o'clock where she is, so she said she would try to make it. We also have Mariam Orjonikidze, who received her master's in sociology and is a senior international relations officer at Ilia State University, and Natia Kekenadze, a PhD student in urban studies at Tbilisi State University and invited lecturer at International Black Sea University.
So for today, there are 3 learning goals that we have for this workshop. These include first to define and explain the applications of Photovoice as a research method. Second, it's to review the procedures, challenges, and ethical considerations of using Photovoice itself. And third, to demonstrate how Photovoice was used to study the emotional impact of infrastructure conditions on internally displaced people in Georgia. Which we made in our study. To help you understand what Photovoice is and how it can be used as a rigorous, systematic, and empirically rich research method, we're going to walk you through the research design of our project and how it was implemented. At times, you will be invited to participate in some of the activities that we have planned for you.
So before we discuss our project in more detail, we'd like to begin this training with just a little bit of an icebreaker. For this activity, you've been provided a handout with a question on the back. It reads, why is a picture worth 1,000 words? And we also have a second question here. How is this idiom useful for considering when visual research methods are most effective? If you're not familiar with visual research methods, then consider instead what you think we mean when we say visual research. So what we'd like you to do is take 2 minutes to think individually by yourself. And then what we'll do is we'll ask for some volunteers to tell us what you think this common adage means and how you think this applies to visual research. Okay, so 2 minutes. For our folks in the chat, you're welcome to type your contributions, and we'd be happy to read them. Okay, so let's take this first question. Why is a picture worth 1,000 words? What does this phrase mean to you? And is, in your local languages, maybe you have a similar saying.
Yeah, we do have one saying. Asjer kagonil sertkhal nanakhi jobia. It's better to see once than hear 100 times.
Ah, yeah, same idea.
They
have the same in Armenian. Can you?
Thank you. I was thinking actually the same because we have the same expression in Armenian as well, which means lավ է մեկ անգամ տեսնել, քան հազար անգամ լսել, which is being translated as she said in Georgian.
So
And then
what I
in
hear
English.
people saying is that this is an idea that transcends multiple languages, right? So there's something powerful about pictures that goes beyond words. What else? What do you think of this phrase? How is it useful for thinking about research methods as researchers?
Well, I guess in a way, like a lot of research is dependent on words, right? And expressing findings through language. And so if that language comes at a loss, then that's where these images can come in handy to provide sort of that bridge between the findings and those who the audience, I guess.
Other ideas?
So from a teaching point of view, there's an immediacy and inherently more engaging and kind of interest factor with a photo, or even better yet, a film. And I've seen this again and again, where this is not simply the post-COVID generation. This is something that's true for people of my generation as well. There's something immediate and inherently more interesting, and it opens up a rich vein of conversation. All of this you get from the visual medium.
So more engaging, and there's an interest factor. Has anyone in the room ever incorporated visual methods in their projects before? Natia?
So I was, during the pandemic, I was teaching. During the pandemic, I was teaching a cultural geography class at PSU. So, and you cannot do really cannot do a fieldwork, right? But you can. So I asked students to just take photos from their balconies if they were living in the apartment blocks, and check like how, because many of those balconies look at the kind of courtyard or the playground, and ask them to describe, to take kind of 2 or 3 photos to like during different times of the day, and to see how that space is being used by the kind of residents or non-residents, or some kind of outsiders such as police, for instance. So yeah, that was my experience.
Wonderful. So in this example, one, it sounds like what you had them do was capture the cultural landscape of where they lived, which is a great teaching tool. And 2, it sounds like you can use the actual photo itself as a type of data, right? So we can use the photo to understand how that space is being used at particular times during the day, which we can track. So we wanted to get you thinking about visual methods so that we could give you some examples, and one specifically Photovoice. So when we say visual research methods, we're talking about a collection of methods which use images as part of the process of generating data. Examples of visual methods include, but are not limited to, visual ethnographies, photo elicitation, and participatory mapping. Visual methods use a wide range of image types, maps, drawings, photos, film, video, graffiti, advertisements, you name it. And these research methods can be really effective in recognizing participants as experts in their own lives, facilitating empowerment, and bolstering opportunities for collaboration. Visual methods can elicit ideas and experiences that might otherwise be difficult to express through discussion or language, and can be useful in settings where there might even be a language barrier between the participant and the researcher. Some researchers consider visual methods as effective tools for bringing visibility to social issues and groups that would remain otherwise invisible or hard to reach. Today, we discuss with you Photovoice, which is one specific visual method that combines auto photography, which is an approach that asks participants to take photos of their environment, and photo elicitation, which uses photos to generate verbal discussion and evoke emotion, memory, and ideas. So first, we'll start by identifying the research problem at the center of our project that we conducted, before we then discuss kind of how we used Photovoice and the procedures that we followed. So at the end of 2022, the UNHCR reported 10.4 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. Of those, 62.5 million are characterized as internally displaced persons, or IDPs. In the South Caucasus, over 1 million people live in protracted and precarious displacement situations. The Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazian, and South Ossetian conflicts all resulted in mass displacement. In the Republic of Georgia, IDPs account for 308,000 people, and this is according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. This population can be separated into largely two groups. I'm not counting ecological migrants in here, mostly conflict-affected populations. So those that were displaced because of the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, and those old caseload IDPs from armed conflict in the early 1990s. So the diverse struggles of IDPs in Georgia has been well documented in the scholarly literature. And the issue of durable housing makes up an important dimension of this research. Much of it concerns the roughly 40% of IDPs that ended up in what are called collective centers compared to private housing. So hotels, schools, former industrial complexes, abandoned hospitals, sporting facilities, many of which were not suitable for living, were transformed into shelters. Critical attention has been given to the marginalization and social exclusion caused by the failure to integrate these collectively settled Georgian IDPs into mainstream societies in urban places. The severity of the IDP housing problem has been especially demonstrated by several stories in the popular media over the years. So, for example, in 2010, a 46-year-old woman was hospitalized with severe burns after she set herself on fire in protesting unlivable housing conditions. In 2017, IDPs in Dzotsenidze showed their mouths shut and staged a hunger strike, much like the miners in Chiatura are doing. And most recently, a 52-year-old man living in Sanatorium Kartli in Tbilisi jumped to his death over unlivable housing conditions. These are just a few incidents and do not include those stories of men and women who have died in fires, falling off broken balconies, and from neglect. So a feminist curiosity in the precarious material conditions of collective centers prompted us to ask the following research question. How do housing infrastructure conditions impact IDP's sense of identity, dignity, personhood, agency, and sense of futurity? This research question was informed by the emotional turn in political ecology. This is an area of research seeking to better recognize the often undervalued political work of emotions and the gendered, intimate, and power-laden embodiments of environmental and social justice conflicts. Scholarship exploring emotional ecologies situates emotions in a web of relations, revealing the complex and multifaceted affective attachments people have to their environments, and in turn, their effects. Such a framework takes into consideration the multiple geographical and temporal scales of ecological feelings, their social and political dimensions, and the relationships they emerge from and contribute to. We theorize that by being attentive to felt geographies of displacement, we could better measure how marginalization by IDPs is operationalized through urban environmental factors, specifically disconnections and absences in things like water, sanitation, heating systems, and even disrepair. We were especially attentive to the intimate effects of these conditions, such as how housing quality impacts relationships, disrupts life trajectories, structures decisions, and impacts everyday social and cultural practices. We then conceptualize the impacts of this as a type of slow violence, which we refer here to as violent infrastructure, and I've included a series of citations that make up our conceptual framework. To empirically study the emotional dimensions of this violent infrastructure, we undertook a feminist visual ethnography. Our study combined archival sources with participant observation, documentary photography, semi-structured walking interviews, and Photovoice as our principal methods of data collection. The decision to do this was largely informed by the literature and authors such as Tom Davies and Alexander Vorbrug, who argue the utility of visual methods in capturing the drawn out and complex timescapes of slow violence. For this training, we want to focus on our use of Photovoice in this project. Photovoice is a qualitative, community-based photographic participatory research method, seeking to build critical consciousness by amplifying the voices of those in positions of limited power to tell their stories of marginality, injustice, or exploitation. Photovoice was first developed by Carolyn Wang and Mary Ann Burris in 1997. They do public health research, and it's strongly influenced by feminist theory, the idea of empowerment, and Paulo Freire's concept of critical consciousness. In Photovoice, empowerment and building critical consciousness is accomplished by directly engaging participants in the research process through photography. Images are used to deconstruct problems by posing meaningful questions in a community to find actionable solutions. So it's an activist-oriented methodology. Photovoice is commonly used in the fields of anthropology, sociology, community development, public health, and education. There's no single model for implementation. So if you're considering using this method, our recommendation is that you do a very thorough literature review and adapt the method to fit your specific research context and population.
The main goal of Photovoice is to help people whose needs and sometimes whose very existence are often ignored to gain some sense of control over their lives. Therefore, Photovoice might be considered under the following circumstances. First, when Photovoice can change people's opinions about themselves and about the environment. Second, when a problem or a situation needs to be publicized, when change is necessary and policymakers or others need to be held accountable. Then you can also consider this method while community assessment is needed, or when you need to document the process or to gather data for an evaluation of an intervention or a program. Also, we can use Photovoice when you need to document a site, an event, or a way of life that is threatened or about to disappear.
So in our project, we focused on a small sample of the 10,000 internally displaced ethnic Georgians from Abkhazia located in the city of Skoltubo. The Skoltubo municipality is in the Imereti region of Georgia, and during the Soviet era, Skoltubo and its 22 sanatoria attracted thousands of Soviet citizens under the 1936 Constitution, which guaranteed workers the right to rest and leisure. No longer operational after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the decomposing remains of this once luxurious balneological spa town became a refuge for thousands of IDPs. Although IDPs originally believed this arrangement to be temporary, they ended up spending 3 decades in the buildings until most were resettled in the last year. Renewed interest in the investment and economic development of Skoltubo and its unique history is what sparked our interest in this particular field site, especially concerns that IDP needs and interests might be compromised in favor of state political and economic interests. So our visual ethnography project took place in Skoltubo over the course of the summer and fall of 2021 and the summer of 2022. In 2021, we focused specifically on understanding the lived experience of the sanatoria inhabitants. However, as we were conducting this Photovoice project, the Internally Displaced Persons, Eco-Migrants, and Livelihood Agency awarded hundreds of apartment contracts to IDPs. Because the transition to new housing loomed over our research participants, we then decided to extend our research study and returned the following year to then examine how the intimate lives of these IDPs had been transformed by receiving new apartments. So we interviewed them when they were living in the sanatoria, and then we interviewed most of them who had moved the following year. If you're interested in this part of the research, we're not going to be talking about that today, but I'll be delivering a works in progress talk next Wednesday night on that aspect of our research. So although we interviewed many IDPs for the larger study and other types of stakeholders, only 10 IDPs completed the Photovoice component that we're talking about today. We recruited 10 adults over the age 18 from several sanatoria using snowball sampling. Although we aimed for gender parity, only 2 of our 10 participants identified as male. Participants' ages varied between the early 30s and the 70s. So some of our participants were infants when they arrived in Skoltubo, and some were adults. Because Photovoice is a very labor and time-intensive methodology that engages with hard-to-reach populations, sample sizes for this type of research tend to be quite small in the literature, usually between 5 and 15. And now that I've done this, I can understand why they're so small. It's difficult to enroll that many people.
So what about procedures? Each of the 10 Photovoice participants completed the following procedures. You can see the stages. This included 4 total interviews over both rounds of fieldwork in 2021 and 2022. All interviews were conducted in Georgian with interpreting to English. Interviews were audio recorded with permission and transcribed. All consent forms and releases were translated into Georgian. Ethnographic field notes were also created, and hundreds of photos and video clips taken of the sanatoria as a supporting documentation of our fieldwork. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic and travel restrictions in 2021, there were several major modifications to the original protocol.
So that last point, we conducted our Photovoice in the middle of the pandemic. So there are things that we're going to talk about today that we would have done differently had conditions been different. So if you're considering this in the future, just again, visit the literature to see the kind of standard practices which we had to modify in order to do this project. So after completing informed consent procedures in compliance with the protocol that was approved by Moravian University, research subjects first completed a preliminary walking interview and basic photography training. During this interview, participants provided a kind of personal history and described their perceptions, experiences, and relationship to changes in the sanatoria material conditions over time. Following this interview, we had planned to hold a full 2+ hour workshop to train all of our participants in operating their cameras, photography basics, and the ethics of photography, including safety and using release forms. However, because of the pandemic and the inability to hold group gatherings at that time, this training was condensed down, and it was something we delivered at the end of the preliminary interview on an individual basis with each participant. Because of concerns about unequal access to smartphones and cameras, concerns about photo quality for printing for exhibition, as well as the logistics of transferring files, all participants in our study were loaned a Kodak PixPro FC43 digital camera. We had 6 cameras, which were purchased under the grants I received, along with soft cases, extra batteries, memory cards, and some other equipment. Up to 5 cameras could be loaned at once, and we kept a spare in case there were damage or malfunction to one of the cameras. And then participants were given up to a week to take photos before they were kind of expected to return the cameras and then do their next interview. So participants were initially given little instructions about what to photograph. And this is because we took kind of a grounded approach to this process. We wanted participants to show us what they wanted us to know about their experience related to the conditions of the sanatoria, things like resilience, survival, and adaptation to those conditions, and transformations of that space over time. No restrictions were made about how many photos they could take. However, all were instructed that they would have to select 5 photos to discuss with us in more depth when we met for the next interview. So after taking their photographs, Photovoice participants met for what we called our photo dialogue interview. Cameras were returned and memory cards were uploaded to a laptop, which we used to review the photographs with the participants. So we'd sit with them with the table and we'd load them up and do a slideshow, and we'd flip through all the pictures together. Metacognitive questions were asked about the process that our participants used to decide what they photographed. And we also then asked them kind of what they gained from the process of taking these photos. Although we skimmed over the entire collection, participants then, told us what 5 photos they wanted to discuss in more detail. And here on the screen, you can see one of the later versions of our questionnaire asking participants to describe the story behind their photo, its importance, title, and some other questions. This is a modification of, there are 2 models in most of the literature on Photovoice. One is a showed model, it's like SHO, and they have like different questions for each letter. And the other is photo, PHOTO. And so they're similar type of questions, like what's being represented here? What do you want people to know? We modified this for our needs, but there are kind of standard versions of this in the literature. At the end of our interview, participants submitted additional release forms, giving us permission to then exhibit their photos in public. And what photos? So we did ask them, we're like, do you give us permission to show any of the photos that we have on the memory card, some of the photos, only the 5, only 2 of the 5? So I don't think we actually had anyone say they all said they didn't care, use all of them, but we asked them nonetheless.
Okay, so now it's time for a little activity. So to help you build empathy with this process, we'd like to invite you to participate in some kind of like photo analysis activity yourself. So we'd like to ask you to take out your smartphones and check your last 5 photos and choose one from those last 5 photos and answer the following questions about this photo. So first question would be, what is happening in this photo and why is it important to you? Then you have to answer the second question. How does this photo make you feel? And what would you name this photograph? So you are, of course, all encouraged to ask questions to learn more about the meaning of the photograph and what it shows. And participants who are joining us from the Zoom meeting, you are also very welcome to post a picture and respond to the questions which are shown on the slide.
So to help facilitate this, what we'll ask is everybody kind of look through your phones. If you want to participate, we'll underscore the voluntary part of this. Take a couple minutes to think through the questions. And then what we'll do is we'll break you up into 2 groups, and then we'll ask for just a couple volunteers who are brave and feel like they can answer these questions. So don't feel like you're all on the spot to report your photos.
So we don't have the questions beforehand. You have the questions.
These are the questions.
Yeah. So why, what is happening on this photo? Why is it important to you? How does this photo make you feel? And what would you name this photograph? Those are the questions.
So what did you learn about this process as participants, right? So not as researchers, you were the research participant there for a moment. Tell me about the experience.
Well, there was like, I feel like now I like know the people around me kind of. We talked about our days or like our memories and our thoughts, which you don't really get like all that often at these conferences. So like sharing it's kind of like looking into someone's like family album almost, and they tell you the stories that like come with the different images. So that was exciting for me because now I feel like I know a little bit more about everyone around me. Makes me feel like I don't know, I'm a little more included in that experience, I guess.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the activity itself gave you a sense of belonging in this room. It also was very personal in a way that you might not have learned that information. Others? Was there anything challenging?
Maybe when you are taking the photo, you are not going so deep into your feelings and what you think about the photo or even the view that you are seeing. But when you have the exercise to do, you start to ponder more about your own feelings and your own experiences.
Yeah, so it forces you to undergo, gosh, like a process of analysis and reflection on your own life that you probably take for granted, right? You take a picture, you maybe don't even know why you're taking that picture. It struck you at that moment. Maybe it was pretty and you collected it, but no one ever forced you to like really reflect on what it was you were trying to capture there. Any other challenges or observations? Oh.
I think it's a good night, so
I'm a bad hybrid facilitator. What about this second question about how the photo makes you feel? Did anyone struggle with this? And if you didn't struggle, my follow-up question would be, were you actually able to name an emotion tied to your photo? So when I say the word emotion, what types of words are we looking for?
One that came to my mind when I was looking at it was kind of bittersweet was an emotion that I felt in connection to the image that I was sharing. But I mean, some other ones like kind of joy is another one that I kind of heard, or like, yeah, so those are kind of the emotions that I heard or felt myself.
So for our project specifically, emotion is really important, which is why we included it here. But if you do a Photovoice project, you may not be asking that question, but I want to come back to this when we talk about our photos. Others?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of easy. I took a very uninteresting photo, which is only interesting because it's a complete contrast with everything else in Tbilisi. I took a photo of the luxurious lobby of this hotel, which is just, if I were to name this, it would be something like contradiction, schizophrenia, or out of touch. It just seems a world removed, especially with some of the other much more interesting photos that we were sharing in this group.
Do you think if others looked at your photo, they would interpret it that way?
I think in this room, yes. In this country, yes. I'm from the United States, and in my community, no. They're like, it's a hotel lobby. What's interesting about that?
So I think the reason why I asked that follow-up question is to illustrate that our photos reflect our worldviews and these deeply personal perspectives. So even when we are analyzing photos as outsiders, having interviews with participants about their photos is really essential to understand what it is that they are trying to capture versus what it is we see as the viewer. So that's a really important component of the Photovoice methodology. Thank you for your cooperation on that activity. So going back to our process. So the next stage of Photovoice involves the whole group of participants deciding how they then want to share their pictures. So after you interview them about their photos, then ideally you would interview them again, and they would decide kind of who their intended audience would be and how they want to use those photos for social change. Now, to complete this step, we conducted exhibition planning interviews mostly by phone. This stage was intended to be a focus group activity where we would bring all of our 10 participants together so that they could share their photos and kind of co-generate knowledge about what those photos, what the message of those photos were as a collection, but also collectively determine what they wanted to do with those photos. Now, due to access coordination problems, and kind of the general COVID context at that time, we just did these individually. We did more of like a qualitative survey, because when we started asking people these questions about who do you want to be your audience and stuff, we found that our participants really struggled to imagine how their photos could be used. So we had to modify our approach to that question and make it much more like, would you be comfortable publishing these online? Would you be comfortable doing this? And helping them a lot more come up with different ideas, because when we just laid it out to them in an open-ended way, they just were they were like, I don't know what to do with these photos. So this is one of the modifications that we made largely as a result of COVID. We then took these qualitative surveys and synthesized them, and we as a research team then determined kind of how to actualize the feedback that we had synthesized based on those respondents. Depending on how you're using Photovoice, like a lot of NGOs use Photovoice for instance, they might actually have the participants themselves run some kind of event where they're showing the photos and or doing some kind of project with them. Because we use this in a research capacity, and we have to protect the identities of our research participants, they're a little bit removed when we tend to show them to keep protecting them.
Sorry. So you can see on this slide a new apartment in Tbilisi. This photo was taken by me. So Ariel returned the following year to Otruba, and Mariam and I joined to her to follow the resettlement process as ITPs transition to new housing from the sanatorium. This involved revisiting the sanatorium buildings as they went up for public auction and enrolling new research subjects in our larger ethnography. During this stage of our project, Photovoice participants also completed a fourth interview with us.
So we went to see kind of how things had changed for them. And in addition, it was a great opportunity for us to update them about kind of what we were doing with their photos and share a little bit. And one of the things that we were doing was we had this pop-up show that we were doing. And so we would take this banner we created with us to show like, hey, we are doing stuff with your photos. We also have like a group chat with our participants that we use to kind of communicate with them. And sometimes they share other photos of their life or things they're worried about. So we do continue to keep contact. And because we've built relationships with these folks over the last couple of years.
So Even though this method is really rich and very interesting to use, there are numerous challenges to Photovoice, and in the process of implementation, we have definitely faced some of the challenges, and we wanted to share those challenges with you. So the challenges includes, first of all, the time commitment, cost, the flexibility, and the patience required from the participant side, unequal knowledge of photography by the participants, and maybe unequal knowledge of technology itself too, and the risk of causing negative feelings for participants as well. So on this slide, we named some of the specific challenges that were related to our project. First, as Ariel mentioned several times, we had to make many modifications because the project was implemented during the pandemic. So the context of pandemic forced us to make many changes to the original protocol. But also everyday life in the sanatoria itself presents numerous of hazards, starting from mold, for example, to feral animals that are present in the sanatoria buildings, and falling cement. So we urge those who are considering to use the Photovoice method themselves in the future to fully be aware of those challenges that could be specific to the field site you're choosing, and make careful preparations to minimize those risks of harm, not only for you, but also for the participants who are involved in the research. Third, for our case, it was really difficult to build trust and rapport, considering many aspects that were contextual for our research. For example, the state failures of care and perceptions of corruption in the monitoring process itself by state actors, a continuing economy of humanitarian intervention, animosity between the IDPs and the locals of Otruba, as well as previous issues with media representation, created a culture of suspicion, and it was definitely a barrier for us in the recruitment process. For example, we had to, for example, repeated many times that we were not from media, we were not from television, because they always thought that we were journalists, and talking to us might affect their monitoring process or things like that. So this was definitely, their previous experiences definitely affected the process of building a trust and rapport with our participants in our case.
Thank you, Mariam. So because of IDPs are marginalized population that has experienced significant trauma, most suffered from alexithymia, which means that they having no words to describe feelings and experiences, and getting respondents to discuss their feelings was extremely difficult. Similarly, when it came to empowerment, the dimensions of the project, we found that granting IDPs greater autonomy and authorship over their stories was easier said than done. While IDPs could give very concrete suggestions for how to improve their housing conditions, most struggled to offer us specific ideas for how they imagined their photos could be used. So, and finally, displacement is a very politically sensitive topic. We all know that. This was most evident when we went to conduct a series of pop-up promotion events with a banner about our project in Tbilisi, Kutaisi, and Batumi. Ariel already told about you. Being denied a permit to show in Kutaisi reminded us of the deeply politicized dimensions of our work.
So some of the challenges were mitigated by careful planning and field-based ethics. So I want to underscore that planning is so important with this specific methodology. The single most important measure we took was to carefully implement a series of steps to minimize the risk of harm to our subjects. These were outlined in our protocol that was received and approved by the Institutional Review Board at my university. This included reinforcing that participation in all stages was voluntary, using informed consent procedures to educate participants about our commitment to their safety and, more importantly, their privacy. This also included the use of pseudonyms, which we allowed participants to select so they could not easily be identified. Moreover, we used our photography training to talk about what to photograph, why they should take pictures, like how they could be used, like our role as being like an amplifier, right? Where they didn't feel like they could protest to their own government, we would assure them that we could play that role for them, that we could amplify their stories and voices while protecting their identities. Trauma was probably the biggest obstacle for us. So to minimize kind of negative feelings and discomfort, all members of our research team practice trauma-informed care and empathetic listening skills when we engage with our participants. This meant placing the needs of the participant above the project always. Sometimes this included letting participants vent before an interview. We sometimes let them do this for an hour until we saw their bodies release their tension and they were fully ready to engage with our questions. Sometimes we would skip questions, like intuitively understanding that there were certain people based on the things that they had told us that it just wasn't important for us to ask that question to them, knowing it might upset them. We did other things like negotiating the settings of interviews. We preferred to do walking interviews, meaning walking with our participants, going to their home, walking through the sanatorium while we talked to them. But some of them were deeply ashamed of where they lived and not comfortable with that. So in those cases, we would host them at our place or in a public park, wherever they felt the most comfortable to talk to us. Sometimes this also meant really being kind of in tune to our research team and just the way that we work together. And I didn't present this in my bio, but I have 2 degrees in conflict resolution. So conflict resolution is integrated into our practice as a research team, and everyone on my team underwent, they can tell you, extensive training before we went into the field, knowing we were working with vulnerable people who had already suffered extensively. So simple acts of kindness were also a big part of our research process. And in fact, one of the reasons that Photovoice was selected as a method is because of its roots with social and personal transformation. It's often used by scholars because of its synergy with trauma-informed care. It rehumanizes and provides dignity to subjects who have been otherwise reduced to a label, who have had little choice in the way they have received care, and who have had no opportunity to be an active agent or co-generator of knowledge in other types of research. So we took the empowerment dimension of this very seriously. So this brings us to the findings of our project. So what did we learn from our participants about the emotional and intimate impacts of infrastructure conditions? The emotional and intimate effects of infrastructure violence were powerfully captured in Photovoice participant photos. While some photos were difficult to categorize, many could be kind of grouped into the following themes. So 1, dehumanization, humiliation, or shame. 2, fear, worry, and anxiety. And 3, escapism, nostalgia, and longing. These terms are based on the participants' use of emotive language in their narratives and photo descriptions, which were extrapolated through careful attention to the language of feeling. So sensation words, mood words, disposition words. So this is the reason why in the activity, I asked you the question of how does this photo make you feel? And believe it or not, this was the most difficult question to get an answer to, because our participants just lacked a vocabulary to describe what it was that drew them to take that photo and what that photo represented to them. So we really had to work with our questionnaire a lot and each individual person to probe and draw those answers out, because when we asked it, we often did not receive an answer to it. So we had to kind of keep digging. Through their photos, IDPs were able to tell their story of how decaying infrastructure had disrupted life trajectories, structured their decisions, and shaped their sense of identity, dignity, and personhood. In addition, the results of this project offered a rich environmental history of the political life of the sanatoria infrastructure. So we kind of got two things out of this project. So before providing examples of our findings, we'd like to invite you guys to participate in our analysis process. So for this next activity, we selected 2 photos from our project. For each photo, we'd like you to just turn to your same group of people you were talking to before and take a look at the photo on the screen and answer the following questions as best as you can. So the first question is, what is going on in this picture? What story do you think this photo expresses, or what does it express to you? And then how does this photo make you feel? So before you were the photographer, now you are the researcher. So take a look at this first photo and describe what's happening and how it makes you feel. I'll take away the text so you can see it without. There you go.
So for our colleagues who are joining us via Zoom, you're also very welcome to share your opinions in the comment section, chat section, sorry.
So I'm hearing some really great descriptions. So I think it's a great opportunity to take some volunteers who might be willing to share kind of their observations of what they think they're seeing in this photo. And then we'll cover the second question of how this makes you feel as a viewer. So what do we see here? Okay, a bathroom. So tell me about this bathroom. What story do you think what's the story behind this bathroom?
So first of all, when we saw this picture, we thought like about how dirty it is. But first of all, this dirtiness is related to poverty, maybe. So we shared our opinion that we feel some kind of so uncomfortable when we are looking at this picture, but it's totally unsanitary there. However, we realize that people have to use this like bathroom in everyday life, and so maybe poverty is the first idea that came to our mind.
Great. In the back?
Well, I think I will summarize what we discussed in our group. So first assumption also from our side was also poverty, but then we come up like we heard very interesting position that okay, this is poverty. However, here we see also lack of motivation of improving conditions or doing something, because even if you are in poverty, there are some basic stuff that you can do or change wherever you are living. And then some of my colleagues just go and so just go deep into the picture and saw that there are some new things actually, and they are kind of trying to cope with the situation or kind of to improve it in order just to live there. But on the other hand, there were this opinion that maybe they just don't do anything here because they are waiting in order to someday live here, leave the place, so not to live here anymore. So and yeah, that was the discussion. Maybe others can add something.
And how did this, for those of you in the back, how did this photo make you feel?
Pretty sad.
Hopeless, yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about this photo and some like it. So as seen here, many of the photos vividly represented Photovoice participants' experience with feeling dehumanized, embarrassed, ashamed, and humiliated. For example, some participants shared especially powerful stories about the dehumanizing effects of going from having everything to having nothing, which is how they viewed moving from Abkhazia to the sanatoria. They didn't have proper hygiene, or they talked a lot about how their embarrassment had prevented them from pursuing things like romantic relationships or friendships with non-IDP partners. In other accounts, the conditions of the buildings had stopped participants from inviting friends or family to even come and visit them. For example, this photo, Valeria's great shame, shows a blue tiled bathroom. A metal tank in the top corner is, as she describes, a creative solution for holding and heating water, especially when running water itself had not always been guaranteed. Valeria very reluctantly shared this photo. With unease, she told the story of this picture to assert the dehumanizing impacts of infrastructural conditions and the importance of basic hygiene to her sense of dignity. Her photo related to a story about how a family member was wanted to visit from Sochi. However, she felt so ashamed, specifically of this bathroom, that she lied to her own relative and said she wasn't going to be home, just so they didn't have to have the encounter. And when she took this, she, when we were looking through her photos, we had to kind of remind her that the pseudonym and informed consent procedures made her anonymous, because she was so ashamed she didn't want to show the picture because she thought it would confirm society's ideas about her as dirty, lazy, etc. we reminded her that, hey, nobody's going to know that this is your photo. And that, I forget, Nino would be able to tell this better, but she talked about how this bathroom had made her so uncomfortable. And our response to her was, okay, so someone viewing your photo will be uncomfortable for what, 20 seconds, but you were uncomfortable for 30 years, right? As a way of, I mean, sometimes we had to kind of remind them that they could show the photo without fear because of our informed consent procedures. So another photo here, Mono's photo, waiting to be saved, is another example of how IDPs were grappling with dehumanization. This photo is taken from a shared bathroom inside one of the buildings in Sanatorium Metallurgy. Despite the grand architecture of many of the buildings, Mono described the reality of the conditions as uninhabitable. She uses this photo to underscore the human desire for comfort, stating, quote, "No one should live in these conditions," unquote. She then added, quote, "We, both humans and the buildings, are waiting to be saved." Now we have a second photo for you to reflect on for a couple of minutes. So same thing as before. What's going on in this photo? Why do you think whatever it is happening? And then how does this photo make you feel? So we'll do the same thing. We'll just take a couple minutes to talk about this photo, and then we'll look for your ideas and your feedback. So in this case, this actually is the car of the photo. And this was something they included when they told us this photo. But that's the background. So there's a chair. So how does this picture it wasn't as obvious. The other photo was like really obvious. Everything's the same until the outside of the exterior. Well, as our participants say, always yeah. I could laugh. It's okay to be unsure. I know, it's the same thing. That's why I was probing. So should we talk about this as a group? That way we can keep moving. Okay, so I heard some really great description. So what do we see in this photograph? What's happening?
Okay, so we thought about, so this is a kind of common place near their near their apartments, and we see their chair, and probably there might be other chairs as well around where people at the evening maybe they gather, some take time playing cards, talking, drinking beer, something like this. And but they don't care about, they spend a lot of time just like hanging out, but they never care about making this place a bit like, accurate or clean it or something. So maybe they don't perceive it either like some collective responsibility to this place. Maybe they don't consider it their own place. Maybe they even kind of hate this place because it's associated to their IDP status and don't want to. So yeah, and we see that as time has passed, some people adopted to new reality. They might have bought cars, and so they may not be very, very poor, but still this place is getting worse and worse. Well, it's still a car.
No, it's a really great, those were great observations. Does anyone want to add anything to what they see in this photo?
No, maybe I will just add what we thought about both of the photos, that people do not perceive this as their permanent place of residence, as their something they own. And so they don't really take responsibility for looking after it because they hope they will move to a better place and they don't want to invest in it. They are short of money probably anyway. So yeah, it's not worth investing in that. That's why it stays this damaged and uninhabitable for more and more years.
I also see the dream to escape from the place because the view from the building to outside and the car. So it's like who took the photo, he took the photo to show everything that's out of the building.
And how does this photo make you feel? And maybe I should add, is this photo harder to ascribe a feeling word to than the last photo?
Well, the last photo was even more hopeless because it had no escape ways, and here there is a chance that you can go away.
I think that's actually a really good observation. And I'll talk about this more, but we noticed that people tended to take more photos of communal outdoor spaces than their internal spaces. And when we did probe this a little bit, it did turn out that some of that had to do with this first theme of feeling kind of ashamed and embarrassed and not wanting to invite people into that story. So again, from a procedural point of view, we had to remind people, like when we trained them on the camera, we're like, you can show us even the most, awful things, because remember, no one's going to know that this is yours. So if this is an important part of your story, people need to know this, right? So we sometimes had to encourage them to be a little bit brave in their photography, which they weren't naturally inclined to do. So if you are engaging with this kind of community, keep that in mind, that you do want it to be grounded, but sometimes you have to empower them, right? To speak for themselves. And sometimes they have to be reminded that, it's okay to share things that they might not otherwise share. So in this case, this is an example of a photo that was used to convey danger of the conditions in the sanatoria. Things like missing railings, the impact of mold and rot on health, the threat posed by animals, rats, snakes, street dogs, cats. These photos were used to represent feelings of fear, worry, and anxiety. For example, this photo by Ilia, called Fear of Tomorrow, shows an important support pillar for the building that is wearing away, which she described as a harbinger of impending catastrophic collapse. She told us that she was most afraid of this place and avoids it as much as possible. She said she hadn't noticed whether this pillar had always been in such bad condition until she actually had moved to Tbilisi for a few years and then moved back to the sanatorium. And in her larger story, she talks about how this is a communal place where kids like to play, and this made her very nervous and afraid. And the car in the background is hers. And I think she intentionally included that to show how far away she parked her car in case that building would someday collapse. Because you can actually, this is Samgarali, and you can kind of park out in front, and sometimes people kind of drive sometimes they literally have knocked down walls in the sanatorium and they just drive their cars right underneath. Tasso's photo, called Raining Cement, provides an additional example of this association with fear and danger with infrastructure conditions. So this photo especially highlighted important gendered and intergenerational information to us. Participants who were mothers, so remember 8 out of 10 of our participants were women, especially tended to take pictures of places that they were afraid to allow their children to play because of missing railings or fear that the ceiling would actually collapse. And we had one participant, like her son, had been hit with a piece of concrete and had a traumatic brain injury from it. These descriptions of fear and humiliation often contrasted against photos representing what we came to describe as a kind of warm nostalgia of longing for Abkhazia, and sometimes these kind of seemingly fantastical childhood memories of friendship, communal life, and sometimes even optimism. Photos in this category present as a type of escapism. That was the word that we used to represent it. And these photos tended to represent places of what we describe as a mental diversion that helped IDPs cope with the trauma of their experience. This category seemed to provide critical insight into some of the intergenerational dynamics of memory and emotion in relation to the buildings. So for example, some of the younger participants who had left Abkhazia as infants or very young children seemed to narrate and discuss landscape photographs that demonstrated more favorable and jovial childhood memories, such as places that they played or took dance lessons, as you can see in this photo by Ilia called Most Valuable Memory. After all, many of them who were younger said the buildings had been the only home they had actually ever known. This contrasted against those who had fled in their late teenage years or older. Some of those who could remember the rapid shift to squalid living conditions sometimes avoided showing the intimate spaces of their homes, such as their bathrooms, in fear that they might confirm what I already said, society's derogatory public perceptions of them as refugees. Instead, they preferred to show pictures that represented some type of mental escape for them, like this photo, Lana's Path to Hope, where she describes how she goes to sit on this park bench and fantasize about a place she used to sit and watch the sea in Abkhazia. In addition to these major themes, the photos also told the history of decay and factors contributing to the building's disrepair, which some of you were actually starting to talk about in your photo analysis. The most common attribution for the dilapidation of the buildings in the interviews seemed to be state failures and a kind of systematized apathy. Most collective centers have either really never been renovated or were only poorly or partially upgraded. As such, participants generally described being kind of trapped in perpetual cycles of brokenness and repair. Despite these systemic issues, my research team and I observed that conditions between buildings varied greatly. While some of the newer brutalist architectural buildings like Hotel Ilia in such poor condition compared to like older neoclassical structures like Sanatorium Skoltubo, which was like built in 1930, were still parts of it were relatively good condition. We asked like why this was, right? Was this the result of different construction materials, design? Did it have to do with the occupancy rate of those buildings or the carrying capacity, like the number of IDPs that had occupied them for how long, and that stress on the building's infrastructure? When we asked about kind of the factors that influenced deterioration of the buildings, we were pretty surprised with what participants admitted to us. And they talked a lot about the role that they themselves had played in hastening the decay of the buildings. So some of the newer brutalist buildings were only built in like the 70s, right? And like Intoristi was like not even done when IDPs moved in. And so they described it as being like new, like a new building. So we were wondering like, oh, why is it in such bad condition? It really hasn't been that, that long. A few of our participants described the buildings as kind of, quote, nice at first, but atrophy, corruption, and looting contributed to the decline of their conditions. This seemed to occur in the late 1990s and early 2000s as a general result of kind of post-socialist societal instability, and when building managers that had been left over from the Soviet times had departed. As one participant explained, quote, life became bad for everyone, not just IDPs. Deterioration was accelerated by what we kind of call a creative destruction of resources, such as aluminum, furniture, and parquet. These were burned, bartered, and sold off for survival. However, this didn't totally explain why some spaces remained well-maintained while others were in ruins. For example, look at these two photos from two separate participants, Alexander and Georgi in Hotel Intoristi. This demonstrates how conditions starkly contrasted even between floors in the same building. When probed, some participants explained this reflected an ethic of care by residents themselves. And this was something that I think the folks in the back actually were getting at. Most admitted that they did not invest in caring in the buildings because they had perceived displacement to be temporary. When they were breaking the glass in the windows to scrap the metal, they had not imagined that they would still be living there 5, 10, 30 years later. Moreover, some of the older respondents in our study never fully accepted that the sanatorium was home or was theirs. For example, our one participant explained how it was, quote, not mine. Without that sense of ownership, some IDPs may have lacked the motivation to maintain and care for the spaces. So this created a kind of tragedy of the commons effect, which was observable, especially when you compared the internal spaces of people's private rooms compared to those communal spaces in the building. So a lot of times the communal spaces, especially in the bottom floors of the buildings, might have like piles of garbage, there's sewage raining from the ceiling, all sorts of stuff. And then you might enter someone's room, which is cozy and warm and tidy, and they've done a lot to modify that space. These findings became more salient once we conducted our follow-up fieldwork after IDPs had moved and they could compare their new housing situations to the sanatoria. Compared to the dehumanizing situation in the sanatoria, research participants showed how improved, albeit imperfect, and I want to underscore imperfect, the infrastructural conditions are in the new buildings. Nonetheless, these help to kind of restore some sense of dignity, agency, and at least their chance to imagine and create an alternative future than before. We want to bring attention to these findings because at its current pace, it's projected to take something like 20 additional years or so for the Georgian government to rehouse all of these IDPs that remain in collective centers. Moreover, ongoing and new conflicts have driven forced displacement across the globe. Just in the last 6 months, that first slide where I have the displacement numbers has gone up by like 4 million people in 6 months. So we're really using this project as a way to kind of think about the impact of migrant populations and kind of their urban environments.
While Photovoice can contribute to more conventional types of dissemination, such as peer-reviewed publications, exhibition is also the key procedure of this method and for our research project. Exhibition is the tool used to help people care and call them to action. Exhibition of photos may include gallery installation, online presentations, publications. We have also websites and more.
The exhibition of our Photovoice project has taken several forms. Photos have been shown in research presentations like we're kind of doing today in our hybrid format. I've presented it at the Association for Slavic, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies, the Association for Nationality Studies. I've done a few different works in progress talks, and I've had several invited guest lectures at different universities in the United States. We have piloted 2 pop-up promotions in Tbilisi and Batumi last year. We have also held a multi-part creative geography exhibition at Moravian University in December 2022, which included a gallery exhibition of the photos. We have a second set of these same photos, 30 of them. There are only 20 here that are large format. So they're like, each one is like this big. So we did a large exhibition of those. In addition, we did an immersive multimedia exhibition in collaboration with the University Theater Department, where we used archival footage. We had student voice actor read transcriptions of our interviews, and we built sets to replicate kind of the environment of the sanatoria and literally walk our audience through about 100 years of history. So from these initial shows, we then developed what we're doing now, which is a traveling exhibition titled Violent Infrastructure, Ecologies of Decay and Displacement. Like I said, this includes 2 sets of large format prints on Gator board. To advertise to potential venues, we have additional information about our project on our website. We've developed promotional brochures that we can send out to potential venues with all the information about expectations of those venues. We have a photo catalog. We continue to explore other ways of engaging different audiences and classrooms with things like research method workshops and working with classrooms to develop curriculum that might engage our research. Doing this has required a lot of learning, developing graphic design and marketing skills, consulting with artists, working in collaboration with exhibition coordinators and theater departments. So the exhibition alone has taken on, like, it has its own kind of life, which I would argue is not well documented in the literature. Like, a lot of it, I just had to like call friends who are artists and be like, hey, what do I print these photos on? Like, who do I call? How do we set them up? Like, what is the standard for this practice? And that it's been a wonderful opportunity, but as my research team can tell you, like, we've gone through in a year's time, like a ton of learning, and we're still trying to figure it out. This brings us to the end of our training. We hope that this presentation and the photos we have on display here today challenges you to imagine what we describe as more just spatial futures for displaced people, not only in Georgia, but all over the world who face similar infrastructural conditions. Our next scheduled exhibition is supposed to take place in March 2024 at Arcadia University, but we're working to book other venues in the meantime. So if you're interested in hosting our photos at your institution, we have a QR code that takes you to a Google form that has a set of standardized questions to help us work with you, or you can come up and talk to us. I have cards on the table over there. We have, when we did our pop-up exhibition, we're learning about graphic design. We made these postcards with our QR code to the website. So we have a couple of different ways. You're welcome to take some of these if you want. And we thank you for participating in our activities, being good sports. And yeah, we welcome your questions that you have either about our project or about how to implement Photovoice in general. If we have time, I know we kind of at the end of the day here. Thank you. Okay, any questions?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit how you see your role as it relates to this community as being an outsider versus being an insider. And I'm going to leave this deliberately vague.
You want me to answer? Yeah. Oh, it's an interesting question. So I'm a junior scholar. So this is only my second kind of, after my dissertation, this is my first, project. So my dissertation, I worked with communities conflict affected communities that live on the administrative boundary line of South Ossetia. And one thing I learned from this project was, especially as a feminist scholar, how deeply unsatisfying it was to, like, my positionality as a Western outsider. On the one hand, that gave me access to communities. It was easy for me to go through checkpoints and it afforded me some kind of privilege, right? But at the end of the day, it felt very extractive. And I really wanted to kind of decolonize my entire practice, because I did all these interviews and people were really suffering and desperate for help. And, I'm not someone who would ever say I'm some kind of like neutral scholar. I identify as a scholar activist. As I said, I have a background in conflict resolution. So to stay true to those roots, I always ask myself, like, how can I support the people that I'm working with? So in that project, that it was often humble. Like, I would go to public defenders and refer cases, and I knew all the people in all the NGOs and USAID. And so I was always like, hey, they're doing a project. Do you want help filling out the paperwork? What can we do? but even that wasn't, again, that was like not satisfactory. And so when I started thinking about this project, I really wanted it to be a participatory action research project, because I just felt like one thing I learned in my other project was I would go in with my questions and I would often be told, okay, yeah, your questions, but let me tell you about my real problems. And in this, I wanted it to be much more grounded in the things that they wanted us to know. And photos seem like a great way to do that, especially in knowing, like from my prior project, like how deeply traumatized these people are and how difficult it is for them to talk about difficult things and to trust you with that information. So the way I see myself in relation to my research subjects is I like this term, like amplifier, right? Like I really wanted this project to be like me using that positionality and privilege that I have to just like do what they want me to do with it, right? Like I will make your stories louder, and maybe someone will hear that who matters, right? Or maybe, you know, by saying like, hey, all of these people said they really wish they had been involved in the design of the new apartments. Like maybe we can write a policy paper and then take it and say like, hey, people want to be included. They want participatory governance, or they want karma so they have a heating system when they move into their new apartment. So, you know, I like to think of myself as, yeah, is that a good way? Like as someone who's using their positionality to amplify. Any more questions? I don't know if you guys want to answer that too, because you're Georgian, so you might have a different perspective.
So we had quite different experience. First of all, because of the language, and then because they have many assumptions about people who are from USA, and they don't have much expectations for researchers. So first of all, that's kind of a challenge to explain what is your job, how do you relate to those people. So they kind of many times tend to misread your job, and because Ariel was from USA, they might had different expectations from herself and things like that. So we as a Georgian people, maybe we had some more similarities, and they felt in some cases more comfortable saying some things maybe about Georgian context with us, but I mean, I think that Ariel's expertise was really handy in that regard, that she had prior experience with working in Georgia, and I assure you that she in many times had much more in-depth understanding of Georgian context that maybe some Georgian researchers have. So that really helped a lot. And she knew some Georgian, so that also helped with not feeling as an outsider. And I would also add that we were trying to engage with them, not only within the interviews, but also outside of the interviews. For example, we shared some maybe glass of wine with them, or maybe they would invite us for some fruits and things like that. So this kind of like informal activities help us to be more engaged and involved in the community. So of course we were outsiders, and they could tell us maybe just based on how we were outsiders, but some of these activities helped us to engage more with them and to have a trustful relationship with them.
I want to add, sorry, Ariel, I want to add something. Can you imagine we lived 1 month in Otruba together? So it was a very interesting experience for me as a junior researcher, and this was very interesting field work. And I remember some cases when Ariel know much more better than us, for example, places or some emotions, even emotions. So it was very interesting.
And that's something, if Nino were here to speak more for herself, we the trauma-informed care dimension of our practice is really also an important outcome of this research. So if our participants never read this study or maybe disengage from how we're showing their photos, empathetic listening as a practice with people who have been silenced provides catharsis. So in our interviews, when we would ask them about what they gained from taking the photos, many people cried. And they would say, this was the first time in my life I've been afforded the opportunity to reflect on what has happened to me. And you are the first person that has ever asked my story. And this alone for them, yeah, maybe it was temporary, but that restored, like when we talk about personhood and dignity, like the act of just allowing people to tell their story is restorative and transformative, regardless of what we gain as a researcher from it. So like our process, a research practice itself was important to the healing of this community. That at least we like to think that, even for a moment, just a brief moment. Nino wrote a comment here. She says, Ariel spent endless hours on training us and shared her knowledge. What is more important, we developed practical skills as researchers. So it was something we were all really, really committed to, that compassionate ethic of care in the field. I know we're running out of time, so.
If there are no more questions, just a couple of words to close the conference, and that's all. Thanks a lot for well, that's the end of our 9th conference, and the last conference where we really met face to face and discussed things was in 2019. So it's a long time since we really, it will be 19, yeah. And then 3 times we had online conference, and this is first time when we have conference in a hybrid regime, and since now on, I suppose it will stay like this. I think this is a good model, and because of this hybrid approach, we managed to have widest geographic coverage ever. We never had a participant from as far as China. We had from North America very often, but not from that part of the world. And that's wonderful. That's always brings something new and something different to discussions. As for diversity of topics, again, I think that was outstanding these 2 days in terms of diversity of issues that were covered by participants, and also diversity of methods that were used in different research endeavors. Especially appreciate non-traditional research methods discussed on this conference. First of all, this one that is very exciting to me. We mostly are people of numbers, and probably pay less attention to qualitative research methods than it deserves. Also, very importantly, we had discussion about archives and archival research, which is totally new thing for CRRC. CRRC as an organization doesn't do that, but we have at least 2 colleagues in this room who are familiar and experienced in working in archives. So that's another new area for us in the future. And finally, I think with all this, with the diversity of methods, diversity of topics, and openness with contributions, I think we are turning ourselves as a CRRC network into what Hans said, 3rd leg of education, because we are trying to achieve what traditional 2 legs of education either don't want to achieve or cannot achieve. And this is creating a community where we step by step increase knowledge and make this knowledge accessible to anyone who is interested, and even people who are not interested. We are trying to push them to be interested in research by providing trainings and by providing skills to them. Finally, of course, this conference is a result of hard work of a few individuals, and wanted to name a few of them. First of all, Dato, thanks a lot for putting everything together. You all know Dato because he was in touch with all of you, and he was behind this schedule and moderators, and who was saying what and when and why. Thanks a lot for that, Dato. And also other colleagues from CRRC, Nino, Matzo, who Eto, Salome, Elene, everyone from CRRC, thanks a lot for putting this together and organizing and making conference accessible and interesting. Thanks to all participants, both online and in person. Special thanks to my colleagues from Yerevan who had so many presentations this time. Thanks and congratulations that you have so much good research to share with others. And with that, I wanted just to ask you that each conference brings new participants and new topics and new methods. And we wanted just to ask you to spread the word for the 10th conference, to bring people with new expertise, new interests, new skills. And it will be, again, hybrid mode next year. So we can include participants from all over the world, and hopefully we will have even resources to invite people to attend and participate in person. Here, probably it would have been good to have a few words of gratitude to sponsors and donors of the conference, but we don't have one. And therefore, I mean, donors believe that CRRC will do it anyway. So why to fund it? And they are right. We will do it no matter what. So we will have many more conferences, many more occasions to meet and discuss our research and our approaches to research with each other. And with that, thanks again. And until next year.